My ex-boyfriend vanished without a trace 10 years ago, and now he's reached out through a hospice nurse with one final request. He wants me to read him a story before he dies. I'm 34 and my husband David is 38. We've been married for 6 wonderful years, and we have a 3-year-old daughter named Lily, who is the absolute light of our lives. Before David, there was someone else, a man named Ethan. I've never hidden my past from David. He knows I had a serious relationship before him, someone I genuinely thought I would marry. But what happened with Ethan has always been a closed chapter, one shrouded in so much confusion and pain that I could never bring myself to discuss the details, even with David. Ethan and I met in graduate school. We were both pursuing our MFA in creative writing at a small liberal arts college in Vermont. He was brilliant, the kind of writer who could capture a feeling in a single sentence and leave you breathless. We were in workshops together, then study groups, then late-night coffee runs that turned into something more. Our relationship was intense and passionate, built on a shared love of words and stories. We were together for nearly 3 years. We talked about the future constantly, where we would live, the books we would write, the life we would build. I was utterly, completely in love with him. Then one day he was gone, not in a dramatic, fight-filled way. It was a Tuesday. We had breakfast together, discussed a new novel we were both reading, and kissed goodbye as he left for his part-time job at the university library. I had classes. When I came back to our small apartment that evening, his keys were on the counter. His laptop was gone. His clothes, his books, his favorite worn-out leather journal, all of it was gone. The only thing left was a single folded piece of paper on the kitchen table with my name on it. Inside, it simply said, "I'm sorry. I can't do this. Please don't try to find me." That was it. No explanation. No phone call. No forwarding address. His phone was disconnected. His email account bounced back. It was as if he had evaporated into thin air. I was devastated. I spiraled into a deep depression. I couldn't write. I couldn't eat. I couldn't understand what I had done wrong. Our friends were just as baffled. His family, whom I'd met a few times, were tight-lipped and clearly grieving themselves, offering no explanations. The consensus, whispered among our mutual friends, was that he must have had a breakdown, that he'd run away from his life, from me, from everything. Some people, years later, suggested he might have been seeing someone else, that he'd orchestrated a clean break to start over. Those rumors stung the most, but I had no way to verify them. He was just gone. It took me a long time to heal. Years. I finished my degree, moved to a new city, and eventually met David at a book launch event for a mutual friend. David is everything Ethan wasn't. Stable, grounded, emotionally transparent. He's an architect, a man who builds things, who plans things, who shows up. He helped me put the pieces of myself back together. He never pushed me to talk about Ethan, and I never offered. That part of my life felt like a closed, haunted room that I simply didn't want to enter ever again. And then last week, I got a phone call that threw the door to that room wide open. It was a woman's voice, professional and kind. She introduced herself as Rebecca, a palliative care nurse at a hospice facility in Burlington, Vermont, the very city where Ethan and I had lived. My heart stopped. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. She explained that she was calling on behalf of a patient of hers, a man named Ethan. My Ethan, he was in the final stages of a rare, aggressive neurological disease. He had, she said, very little time left, perhaps a week, perhaps 2, and he had a final request. "He's not asking for much," Rebecca said gently. "He's heavily sedated for pain, but he has moments of clarity. In one of those moments, he gave me your name and number. He said his wish is to have you visit him. He wants you to read him a story." I was speechless. A story? After 10 years of silence, after leaving me with nothing but a 2-sentence note, his dying wish was for me to read him a story. Rebecca continued, explaining that the hospice had a small legacy program run by volunteers. Patients could request things like a favorite meal, a visit from a loved one, or, in Ethan's case, a final shared experience. She assured me there was no pressure. She was simply passing along his request, as was her duty. She told me that Ethan was bedridden, his speech was severely affected by the disease, and he had trouble communicating. He could only manage a few whispered words at a time. The disease, she explained, had been progressing for years, slowly robbing him of his mobility, his coordination, and now, his voice. I thanked her, numbly took down the hospice's information, and hung up. I sat on the sofa in our living room, staring at the wall, for what felt like an hour, when David came home from work. He found me there, still in my coat, tears silently streaming down my face. I told him everything. The phone call, the request, the 10 years of unanswered questions. David, to his absolute credit, listened without interrupting. When I was finished, he took my hands. "This is insane," he said softly. "And I'm not going to lie, a part of me is screaming that this is a bad idea. But this isn't about me. It's about you. What do you feel? What does your gut tell you to do?" What I felt was a hurricane. Anger for being abandoned. Curiosity that was almost painful in its intensity. A deep, old sadness that I thought I'd buried long ago. And, surprisingly, a flicker of pity. A man I once loved with my whole heart was dying alone in a hospice, his final wish a plea for connection. I told David I didn't know what to do. I needed time to think. For the next 2 days, I was a ghost in my own life. I went through motions with Lily, playing with her, reading her bedtime stories. But my mind was 1,000 miles away, trapped in a cramped apartment in Vermont with a ghost. I talked it over with David endlessly. We did our own risk assessment. The Ethan I knew was gone, replaced by a dying man who could barely speak. He was bedridden, under constant medical supervision. There was no threat, no chance of rekindling a romance. This wasn't about that. This was about a mystery that had haunted me for a decade. This was about a man facing his own mortality, seeking what? Forgiveness? Closure? An apology? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that the questions weren't just as to answer. They were mine, too. Why did you leave? Was it my fault? Was there someone else? Did you ever love me at all? These were the ghosts that had lived in the corner of my mind for 10 years. And this was my only chance to finally lay them to rest. I called Rebecca back and told her I would come. David, without hesitation, said he would come with me. He arranged for my mother to fly in and stay with Lily, booked us flights, and took time off work. He was my rock, my anchor in this storm of confusing emotions. The drive from the small airport in Burlington to the hospice was a journey back in time. The landscape was achingly familiar. The rolling green hills, the white-clapboard churches, the quaint downtown we used to wander through on weekends. It felt like stepping into a dream, or perhaps a nightmare. My hands were shaking in my lap. The hospice was a low, modern building set back from the road, surrounded by carefully manicured gardens. It was peaceful, which somehow made it more unsettling. We were greeted by Rebecca, a warm, middle-aged woman with kind eyes. She led us through quiet, softly lit hallways, the air smelling faintly of antiseptic and flowers. She explained that Ethan was lucid today, which was a good sign, but that we should keep our visit short. She showed us to a small, private sitting room adjacent to his room, where we could wait. "We'll bring him out in his bed," she said gently. "It's easier for him. And you," she looked at David, "are welcome to stay in a room with her, or you can wait here. Whatever makes you both most comfortable." David looked at me. "What do you want?" "I don't know. I whispered. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Can you come in with me? Just for a minute? And then maybe give us a few minutes alone? Of course, he said, squeezing my hand. Whatever you need. A few minutes later, 2 nurses quietly wheeled a hospital bed into the room. And there he was. Ethan. It took my breath away. This was not the vibrant, passionate man I remembered. This was a shell. His body was thin and wasted beneath the white sheet. His face was gaunt, his skin pale and waxy. His eyes, those deep brown eyes that I had once gotten lost in, were sunken but still held a flicker of life. When he saw me, a tremor went through him. He tried to lift a hand, but it only twitched weakly. Rebecca adjusted his pillows and the flow from his floor, then quietly left the room, pulling the door mostly closed behind her. David stood beside me, a solid, warm presence. I took a step closer to the bed. Ethan, I said, my voice cracking. It was the first time I'd spoken his name aloud in a decade. He tried to speak. His lips moved, but only a faint, raspy whisper came out. He closed his eyes in frustration, then opened them again, focusing on me with an intensity that was painful to see. He tried again. You came. The words were barely audible, slurred, each one costing him immense effort. Of course I came, I said, and to my horror, tears started spilling down my cheeks. I hadn't expected to cry. I was too angry for tears. But seeing him like this, the anger was still there, but was now tangled with a profound, heartbreaking sorrow. David stepped forward. Hi, Ethan, he said quietly. I'm David. I'm Clara's husband. He placed a hand gently on my shoulder. Ethan's eyes moved to David, and for a moment a look of complex emotion crossed his face. Surprise, maybe a flicker of old jealousy, but then what looked like acceptance. He gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. Thank you, he whispered, the words directed at David, for bringing her. We stood there for a few more minutes, the silence filled only by the soft beeping of a monitor. David then leaned down and kissed my temple. I'll be right outside, he murmured. Take your time. He squeezed my shoulder once more and left the room, closing the door softly behind him. I was alone with Ethan. I pulled a chair close to his bed and sat down, my knees almost touching the metal frame. The silence stretched between us, heavy with 10 years of unspoken words. I don't know where to start, I admitted, my voice still shaky. Why, Ethan? Why did you leave like that? No note, no phone call, nothing. For 10 years, I thought I did something wrong, that you hated me, that I wasn't enough. A tear escaped from the corner of his eye, tracing a slow path down his temple and into his thinning hair. He swallowed, a visible struggle. Not you, he rasped. Me. Broken. And then, in fits and starts, with long pauses where he would close his eyes and gather his strength, the story came out. It wasn't the dramatic tale of another woman, or a secret life I had imagined in my darkest moments. It was something far more insidious. Ethan had been struggling with severe depression and anxiety for years, long before he met me. He was a master at hiding it. His brilliance, his passion, his intensity, it was all real, but was also a mask. He was terrified that if anyone, especially me, saw the real him, the crippling self-doubt, the periods of paralyzing despair, the constant, grinding anxiety, they would be repulsed. They would leave. So he hid it, performing the role of the perfect, passionate boyfriend. The pressure became unbearable. He started having panic attacks, which he hid from me. The thought of our future, marriage, a career, the relentless demands of adulthood, loomed over him like a dark cloud. He felt like a fraud, certain he would eventually fail, that I would see him for the broken person he believed himself to be. In his distorted thinking, He decided it was better to leave before I could discover the truth. He believed he was protecting me from a lifetime of pain with a deeply flawed person. The move wasn't planned. He had a complete breakdown. He called his older brother, the only person who vaguely knew about his struggles, and his brother drove down from Maine that very night. They packed up his things in a few hours while I was in class, and he left. He made his brother swear not to tell anyone where he went. He was ashamed. He was convinced that reaching out would only cause me more pain, that I was better off without him. He went to his brother's house, isolated himself, and spent the next 2 years barely functional, consumed by guilt and self-loathing. He eventually got help, therapy, medication. He slowly started to build a new, quiet life in a small town in Maine. He got a job at a small bookstore, a far cry from the literary career we had dreamed of. He never married. He never had children. He said he felt he didn't deserve it. The guilt of what he'd done to me was a permanent resident in his heart. He thought about me every single day. The neurological disease was a cruel, ironic twist. It was a slow, degenerative condition that was essentially a physical manifestation of the mental prison he'd been in his whole life, slowly robbing him of control of movement, of his voice. As his body failed, he said his mind became clearer. He realized that dying with a secret, without ever trying to make amends, was a fate worse than death itself. He contacted the hospice's legacy program. He didn't even know if I would still be at the same address, but he gave them my name and the city where we'd last been together, hoping the internet or some database could find me. And it did. By the time he finished, he was exhausted, his eyes fluttering closed. I was crying a steady stream of tears. I wasn't crying for the relationship we'd lost, but for the lonely, terrified young man who'd been so convinced of his own unworthiness that he destroyed the best thing in his life, and for the lonely, dying man in front of me who had carried that burden for so long. I reached out and took his hand. It was cool and dry, so fragile. "I'm so sorry you went through that alone," I whispered. "I wish you had told me. I would have helped you. I would have been there." "I know," he whispered back, his eyes still closed. "That's why I had to go. I couldn't let you carry my weight. You weren't a weight, Ethan. You were the person I loved." I squeezed his hand gently. "I'm not angry anymore. I was for so long, but I'm not now. I understand." He opened his eyes then and looked at me with an expression of such profound relief and gratitude that it broke my heart all over again. "Thank you," he breathed, the words barely a whisper of air. "Story?" It took me a moment to realize what he was asking for. The request, the one that had started this whole surreal journey. "You still wanted to read your story?" I asked, a watery smile touching my lips. A tiny nod. "Of course," I said. I looked around the room and spotted a well-worn paperback on his bedside table. It was a collection of short stories by Raymond Carver, one of our favorite authors in graduate school. I remembered us staying up all night, reading his stories aloud to each other. I picked it up, and it felt open to a dog-eared page. It was his favorite story, A Small Good Thing. I began to read. My voice, shaky at first, grew stronger as I fell into the rhythm of the prose. It was a story about connection, about loss, about the small, good things that hold us together. It felt impossibly fitting. I read for maybe 20 minutes. When I finished, I looked up. Ethan's eyes were closed, but a small, peaceful smile was on his lips. His breathing was slow and even. He was asleep. I sat there for a long moment, holding his hand, listening to him breathe. Then I gently placed the book back on the table, leaned over, and pressed a soft kiss to his forehead. "Goodbye, Ethan," I whispered. I walked out of the room on unsteady legs. David was waiting in the sitting room, and he stood up the moment he saw me, his face a mask of concern. He wrapped his arms around me and I sobbed into his chest. All the grief, all the confusion, all the relief of the past week and the past 10 years pouring out of me in a great cleansing wave. On the flight home, I told David everything. He listened, holding my hand, asking quiet questions. When I was done, he just shook his head slowly. "Was sad story," he said. "I'm glad you went. I'm glad he got to tell you. And I'm glad you got to hear it." 2 weeks later, I received a small, plain envelope in the mail. There was no return address. Inside was a single piece of paper. On it, in a shaky, barely legible scrawl, were 2 words: "Thank you." It was from Rebecca, the hospice nurse. She included a short note explaining that Ethan had passed away peacefully 3 days after our visit, and that he had dictated this final message for me, insisting she write it down and mail it. The note said he was at peace. I taped that piece of paper to the inside cover of my journal. It's a reminder of a strange, sad, and ultimately beautiful ending to a story I thought would forever remain a mystery. David and I are okay. Lily is okay. We're planning our summer vacation. Life goes on as it does, but something has shifted. A weight I didn't even know I was still carrying has been lifted. The ghost is gone, and in his place is a sad, complicated memory of a boy I once loved, who was too scared to let himself be loved back, but who found the courage to ask for forgiveness in the end. Sometimes, the stories we never get to finish are the ones that need an ending the most. And sometimes we get to be the one who writes that final chapter, not with anger, but with a small, good thing